Who are some upcoming free agents that would fit with the Spurs, and what are the Spurs' chances of landing those players? Aside from Kevin Durant, which players should the Spurs try to add via trade? Let's look into these questions. You know, what I've been doing lately is I've been updating my rosters for all 30 NBA teams. And as I'm doing that, I'm kind of keeping tabs on upcoming free agents and also players who look like realistic trade targets. When I say realistic trade targets, I mean like players that either there's been rumors that they might be available or, you know, it's not like the cornerstone of a franchise that we know that team's not looking to move. So again, these are players that I've been looking at, you know, on trades and free agents kind of list and trying to figure out, you know, who could be a more gettable player for the Spurs. I do want to say that I've only scouted 12 teams so far, so if there's a player who I don't mention on this list, it's because I probably haven't got to his team yet. So again, players that I'm not going to mention here who I think are good fits for the Spurs early on are players like Naz Reid or Brook Lopez, just because I haven't got to the Bucks' cap sheet nor the Minnesota Timberwolves' cap sheet. But what I want to do here, though, is I want to do like a lightning round style where I'm going to kind of throw the player's name out there and just give a quick explanation on why that player would fit or maybe contract reasonings why that player wouldn't fit. And then again, if you want to read more in-depth analysis, make sure you sign up for the newsletter over at thespotupshot.com. So let's begin with the free agents. So far, not that many. I'm mainly focusing on bigs and wings right here in this conversation. So for some forwards who are 6'7" to 6'9", I found two players who would fit with the Spurs, but again, there's some reasonings why I think that San Antonio shouldn't go after those players. So the first player is DayRon Sharpe, 6'9", big out of Brooklyn. So the issue with him is that he is going to be a restricted free agent, which gives the Nets the potential to match a offer sheet to him. So I do think that Sharpe's market could be like in that $6 to $9 million range, but the Nets reportedly do want him back. So if that's the case, that means the Spurs or any team that has interest in Sharpe, they're going to have to overpay. So when I say overpay, it might take like 10 to 11 million a year to see if Brooklyn doesn't, match that offer sheet. So again, I think that's too risky for the Spurs just because it ties up their cap sheet for 2 days. If Sharpe were to sign a offer sheet with San Antonio, the Nets have 48 hours to match. And then plus, and so what's happening though in the background is that, you know, as the Spurs are waiting for the Nets to match an offer sheet, then other free agents are getting picked up by other teams at that same time. Plus, again, if Sharpe signs for like 11 million per season, that's like taking off almost the entire non-tax mid-level exception San Antonio has, which is 14.1 million. The other player who I think would be a good fit for San Antonio is Guerschon Yabusele. He played with Philly this year. He's 6'8", big. So the Sixers also reportedly want him back. That's been some of the reporting. So I project his market to kind of be somewhere in like the $6 to $10 million range. He is an unrestricted free agent. So again, Philly doesn't have any say so in terms of matching offers for him. But again, $6 to $10 million takes up a big chunk of the non-tax mid-level exception. And I would just say probably wait on him just because he's not a true defensive center going to bring a lot of height. I know he's an impact player who can help out, but again, the minutes really aren't there for him because right now, as the roster stands, the Spurs would still have Harrison Barnes and Jeremy Sohan getting minutes at some of those forward spots. So it'd kind of be a minutes crunch for him to get a lot of minutes. And again, he's not really addressing a main area of need, which is like a defensive big there on the board. So again, out of the free agents, out of the 12 teams that I've written about, I only found two free agents in terms of those 6'7" to 6'9" forwards that would be fits for the Spurs. But again, I think that it takes a lot to get those players. Now let's look at early trade fits, bigs that are over 6'9". So initially I'd said Mark Williams out of the Charlotte Hornets, but then as I started to dive into his situation, I said probably not. So let me explain why. So first of all, the Hornets kind of know what his market is because they almost got him for a lot at the trade deadline before the Los Angeles Lakers went back on that trade. So they were going to get at the time from the Lakers Dalton Connect, a former 2024 first round pick. They were going to get another future first round pick, and they were going to get a pick swap. So again, the Hornets can't expect to get that much again for Williams, but they can expect to get some pieces of that for Williams if they're going to move him in a trade. Something to note about his contract is that, yes, he's going into the final year of his deal, but he only has 1 year left on his deal, and he is extension eligible, so there's still a chance that maybe the Hornets extend his contract. And then the reason why I'm not so sure he's a good fit going forward for the Spurs is that if he were to get traded to San Antonio, he would obviously be their backup center to Wemby. But is that what he's still a young player? Is that what he wants for like the next 3 to 4 years of his career? Does he want to be a backup big going forward if the Spurs were extended to a contract? And then plus he has an injury history, which is one of the reasons why the Lakers went back on that trade there. So again, I also don't think San Antonio. I think that they don't want to put as much out there for him for a backup center, in terms of first round picks, etc. So again, that's why I said no right now initially on Williams. There's Kelly Olynyk out of the Pelicans. He's not going to solve the Spurs' defensive issues off the bench, in terms of rebounding and being a defensive big, but he would bring some dynamics on the offensive end, especially with his playmaking, his shooting, and his passing. But however, his contract is the big issue here, where he's in the final year of his deal, which is $13.4 million. But the issue with that is that if you want to acquire him, you likely have to either give up a good rotation player, someone like a Harrison Barnes or a Keldon Johnson, or you have to take him into your non-tax mid-level exception, which is using pretty much all of that exception up, so you can't go you can't use that exception anymore to go find other free agents out there for like wings or an actual backup center. So again, that's why I'd say stay away from Olynyk, even though I think he could be traded for maybe like 2 second-round picks with the Pelicans. Next up is Daniel Gafford, a big from the Dallas Mavericks. So him I have as a maybe. So here, let me explain why. He is entering the final year of his contract, and he is extension eligible with Dallas. So that's something to note. However, the Mavs have a lot of forwards and centers now on their roster. They're going to have, obviously, Anthony Davis. They're going to have Derek Lively the second still. Plus, they're about to add in the front court Cooper Flagg, the number 1 pick in the draft coming up. So, again, does Dallas want to look for an extension with him? Probably not. Again, we don't know right now at this point. But I think that his price, though, because he's a very he's a good player to add on a team right now. I think that it's going to cost it would cost something like the 14th pick in the draft, or maybe a future first for him, despite him being in the final year of his contract, at least until February. Then by February, maybe you can include some second round picks for him, and then also. Contract-wise, because I think his salary is a little bit more than the non-tax mid-level exception, so you'd probably have to move either Keldon Johnson or Harrison Barnes for Gafford. But again, I don't think it hurts the Spurs to call the Mavs and just see what they would want for Gafford. Again, I think Gafford would be a good fit, and so he's more of a maybe for me. I have Jakob Poeltl from the Toronto Raptors, a former Spur as well. I'd say no on him just because here's some of the reasons. One, his salary is pretty large. It's at $19.5 million for the next 2 years. He's going to be playing the backup center position. So do you want to pay your backup center $20 million a year? Plus, we don't. Again, the Raptors, they're in no urgent need to move him right now. Right now he'd be their starting center. So there's no reason you're going to have to probably overpay to move him from Toronto. And then not only that, you're going to have to lose rotation players to get Poeltl, which is like someone like Keldon Johnson or Harrison Barnes to make the contracts work. So again, Poeltl, I would say no. And then finally, the last player is Lauri Markkanen, I don't remember his height, but anyway, he's a big, obviously, from Utah. Right now, I'd probably say no from Utah's perspective. So and let me explain why. So the Jazz, I think, would only say yes on Markkanen right now if the Spurs were talking to them, if San Antonio was willing to include the second pick for maybe Utah's 5th pick plus Lauri. So, and again, based on the reporting, we don't see any kind of trades right now that the Spurs would look at to move the second overall pick. So again, that's probably the non-starter. But now, my initial package was this. Do the Spurs want to move the 14th pick? Maybe like 3 future firsts, a pick swap, Vassell and Keldon. Maybe that's in the Jazz look at, but we just saw what happened on Sunday where the Memphis Grizzlies agreed with the Orlando Magic to acquire the Magic acquired Desmond Bane, a non-All-Star, whereas, again, Markkanen is a former All-Star, for 4 unprotected first-round picks and a pick swap. So, again, Bane's trade, for him even being like a non-All-Star, but being a very good player, obviously, in this league, has kind of set the market in terms of trades as, are you willing to give maybe 4 unprotected firsts and a pick swap? And, again, by just in terms of what that player has done in the league, Lauri has been an All-Star, at least so far in his career. So it might take just as much as what was offered for Bane, or even more. So again, that's where I think that you have to really overpay if you're San Antonio to get Markkanen right now. If you're not willing to include that second pick, and like I said, right now I don't think that they're willing to include the second pick, considering that Markkanen's on a good multi-year contract there in Utah. So again, I think that it's going to take a lot to get Markkanen. Finally, I want to look at some players like in that 6'7" to 6'9" range. Again, tradable players. So first is Robert Williams with the Portland Trailblazers. So his situation is where he's similar to Kelly Olynyk. Again, I think he would help with the boards. He would help with rim defense, but his contract is the issue. So he's making $13.2 million in his final season coming up. In his final season, but he has an injury history. Obviously, he's always on the injured list year after year after year. Plus, for the Spurs, they're having to use pretty much all of the non-tax middle-level exception by taking his contract into that exception. And then, I don't think it's going to cost too much to get someone like Williams, maybe like 2 or 3 second-round picks, depending on the time that the deal is made. Another player who the Spurs would probably have to overpay for is Herb Jones out of the New Orleans Pelicans. So Jones does have 2 years left on his deal. He's also extension eligible, so this whole conversation could be pointless in a few weeks if he signs an extension with New Orleans. I think that a lot of it depends on how Joe Dumars, the new, running the Pelicans front office, how he kind of sees Jones. How does he evaluate him? And so my initial package before the Bain news was Jones for Barnes, the 14th pick, and a future first. But with the Bain trade, I think now like the Pelicans at minimum, they're asking for like 3 first-round picks for Herb Jones. So again, either way, if the Spurs or any team wants Herb Jones, they're going to have to definitely overpay for him. PJ Washington at the Mavs. I've seen reporting that the Mavs do not want to move him, even though he's in the final year of his deal at $14.1 million. And similar to Herb Jones, where he could sign a contract extension with the Mavs this offseason. So again, maybe he's not even eligible to be traded in a few months. I would say, just looking at trade-wise, I would say the Mavs probably want a first for him. So that'd probably be like the 14th pick in this year's draft. And then also, does Dallas, want someone like Barnes or Keldon to make the salaries work? And then, so again, I think with PJ Washington, it doesn't hurt the Spurs to at least call Dallas's front office to kind of just gauge, what would it take to get him. Again, that's if the KD trade for the Spurs doesn't work out. Next up is a player who I've mentioned multiple times here on the Spotted Pod, Cam Johnson of the Brooklyn Nets. So I know that myself and Colin Reed, we talked about him in our last episode a week ago. So again, he's under contract for 2 more seasons. There's been reporting that the Nets do want a top 10 pick for him. Now, the Spurs don't have a top 10 pick, but they do have the number 14 pick, so it's, just a few slots down. So again, my question is, would, and it goes back to what Colin said last week, would Brooklyn, let's just say that, they've looked at all their options and no one's giving them a top 10 pick for Cam Johnson. So would they be okay with taking some package like Keldon Johnson, the 14th pick, and a 2030 pick swap? Is that enough to get a deal done? So again, this really depends too on the KD situation. Whether or not the Spurs have to, whether or not they land KD. Obviously, that 14th pick may not be available. But again, if they don't get KD, then I think again it doesn't hurt for the Spurs to call Cam Johnson and kind of just figure out what does Brooklyn want for him, coming up around draft time. The final player is Trey Murphy III out of the Pelicans. Again, to get Murphy III, just like Herb Jones, you're going to probably have to pay a lot to get him, overpay to get him from New Orleans, even if they were willing to move him. So here's why. He's under contract, under a very good contract for like the next 4 seasons, similar to Devin Vassell's contract. Initially, about a week ago when I wrote this article, I had said Vassell, 2 first-round picks and 1 pick swap for Murphy. I had already said then that I think the Pelicans automatically say no. But now with this Desmond Bane news, I think now the Pelicans probably going to ask for 4 first and a pick swap, something similar to Bane, or as I mentioned then, something like the Mikal Bridges trade where the Knicks gave up 5 first-round picks for Bridges. So again, it really depends too on how Joe Dumars running the Pelicans front office now, where he sees Murphy and the Pelicans' future. But again, either way for Murphy or Herb Jones, I think that again any team that wants those players, they have to really overpay for either player to try to pry them from New Orleans, because the Pelicans just saw that Desmond Bane, again a wing, a good shooting wing, who's never even made an All-Star team, just got 4 unprotected first and a pick swap. So again, Bane's trade could kind of set the market in terms of the trade market for some of these wings out there, and that's why now these organizations, they don't have to feel pressured to move some of these players on multi-year contracts like a Trey Murphy III or a Herb Jones, because of what they just saw what Bane does out there. For more information on these and more players, make sure to check out the articles titled Free Agent and Trade Fits with the Spurs by visiting thespotofshot.com and signing up for the newsletter. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.